The notification lit up my phone at 2:18 a.m. $450,000 transferred to Lakeside Properties, LLC. I stared at the screen, the blue glow illuminating my face in the darkness of my home office. My heart skipped several beats as I read the alert again, hoping somehow the numbers would change. They didn't. Nearly $500,000, gone from our joint savings account overnight. The same account where I'd been quietly depositing my earnings for years, building what Robert believed was our nest egg for retirement. I leaned back, in my leather chair, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened another email waiting in my inbox. Confirmation from my property management company about a stunning lakefront home in Cedar Lake Estates. The same property my husband had casually mentioned last month as a potential investment opportunity when he'd come across it in his work as a real estate attorney. Now I knew exactly who he planned to invest in, and it wasn't his wife of 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The soft hum of my hidden empire surrounded me. 2 monitors displaying real-time updates from my property management software, a secure laptop connected to my company's private servers, and a wall of certificates carefully disguised as family, photos, and vacation mementos. Each framed document represented another property acquisition or business milestone in building one of the largest privately owned real estate portfolios in the metropolitan area, all while my husband believed I spent my days managing a small property rental business with just a handful of units inherited from my grandmother. Another late night, sweetheart? Robert's voice drifted from the doorway, startling me. He stood there in his monogrammed pajamas, every salt and pepper hair perfectly in place despite the hour, adjusting the designer watch I'd given him last. Christmas, paid for with dividends from my latest property acquisition, the same portfolio he thought was just a modest supplement to his attorney's salary. Just checking on some tenant issues, I replied smoothly, closing the banking app with practiced ease. The lie fell from my lips naturally, honed by years of maintaining my cover as the dutiful wife who managed a small inheritance while he handled the real finances. The Matthews family has a leaking pipe in Unit 3B. The dismissive wave of his hand was so familiar it almost made me laugh. Almost. Don't stress too much about it, Caroline. It's just a rental property, not brain surgery. Just a rental? Property. Like the 30-unit apartment complex I'd purchased in Riverside last year while he thought I was at a property management seminar. Or the commercial building downtown that generated more monthly income than his entire annual salary. At the law firm. The Henderson case is finally wrapping up, he continued, straightening his posture with that self-important stance I'd come to recognize through 15 years of marriage. Big client, big retainer, going to run late tomorrow with the closing paperwork, so don't wait up. I nodded, my face a mask of wifely understanding. What Robert didn't know was that I'd seen the text messages on his phone last week when he'd left it charging in the kitchen. There would be paperwork tomorrow, but it wasn't for the Henderson case. It was for the lakefront property that my shell company owned, the one he was apparently buying for someone named Veronica. You should treat yourself tomorrow, he added, pulling out his wallet and handing me his credit card. The premium card that was actually on my account, though he believed it was his. Buy something nice. You've been so understanding about all these late nights. The platinum card felt heavy in my hand, another thing he wouldn't have without my hidden success. I thought about the jewelry store charge from yesterday, wondering if Veronica was wearing her new diamond bracelet already. The Henderson case must be going well, I said carefully, watching his reaction. You seem confident about the outcome. It's basically a done deal. He stood straighter, preening slightly. Once we finalize tomorrow, I'm thinking of taking some time off. Maybe we can visit that lake property I mentioned, once it's on. The market, of course. The audacity was breathtaking. He was planning to use my money to buy my property for his mistress, then potentially take me to see it as a future investment. My phone buzzed with a message from Elaine, my chief financial officer. Paperwork complete. Title search verified. Ready for tomorrow's meeting with the bank. I suppressed a smile, keeping my expression neutral as I glanced at the screen. "You know what?" I said, touching Robert's arm in a gesture that had become mechanical over the years. "I think I will buy something new tomorrow. Something unforgettable." He kissed my cheek absently, his mind already elsewhere. That's my girl. Always making the little things special. What would I do without you handling the day-to-day while I focus on the big picture? If he hadn't been so self-absorbed, he might have noticed my smile didn't reach my eyes. After 15 years of marriage, 12 of them spent building my real estate empire in secret, Robert still saw exactly what he wanted to see. The supportive wife whose biggest concern was making sure his dinner was warm when he came home from his important job. As he left for the bedroom, I opened my laptop to check the final preparations. The lakefront property's paperwork was in order, the shell company ownership documents were ready, and every account was prepared for what would happen tomorrow. In less than 24 hours, Robert would learn that the little picture I'd been handling had grown into something far bigger than his entire career. But first, I had a confrontation to prepare for. One final performance as the devoted wife before the curtain fell on Robert's illusion of success. I picked up his credit card and smiled to myself. He did say to buy something unforgettable. Perhaps I'd finally get that designer suit I'd been eyeing. I'd need to look the part when I revealed myself as the CEO he never knew he married. My phone lit up again with texts from my private investigator. The messages came in rapid succession, painting a picture of my husband's daily activities that made my blood boil despite my outward calm. Meeting with VL again at Westfield office, third time this week. She just arrived with lunch for two from that French place you mentioned. They've closed the blinds. Administrative assistant says they've blocked off the calendar until 3 p.m. I didn't need these updates to know Robert was with Veronica, his paralegal turned mistress. The same woman who was about to become the proud owner of a $450,000 lakefront house, or so she thought. The same woman who had no idea she was sleeping with a man who was about to lose everything. From my real office across town, not the small home office Robert occasionally visited, but the entire top floor of the Grayson building with its panoramic city views, I pulled up the security footage from Robert's firm. The cameras had been installed years ago when my company had quietly become the owner of the building housing his law firm. He'd signed the upgraded lease himself, never bothering to research who owned the management company that had purchased the property. The most interesting thing about watching these videos wasn't catching Robert in his affair. I'd known about that for months. It was watching Veronica Lewis, his ambitious paralegal, who clearly believed she was on a path to something more. I'd done my research on her, of course. 28 years old, graduated with honors from State University, turned down offers from larger firms to work closely with Robert. Her resume had actually crossed my desk twice before, once when my company was hiring for our legal department, and again when she applied for an apartment in one of my buildings. Both times her qualifications were impressive. What a waste of potential, falling for a married man who would never see her as more than a conquest. Ms. Bishop, my executive assistant Thomas appeared at my office door. Unlike the glass-walled office where Robert conducted his affairs, my real headquarters occupied the entire top floor of a prestigious building downtown, where I ran Carolina Properties, the parent company that secretly owned 27 separate real estate businesses across 3 states. "The bank representatives are ready for you," Thomas said, his efficiency having been invaluable over the years in helping maintain my double life. "And the final paperwork for the Cedar Lake property has been prepared exactly as you requested." "Perfect timing," I replied, standing and smoothing down my designer blazer, a subtle armor for the battle ahead. "Has legal confirmed that everything is in order for tomorrow?" Thomas nodded, falling into step beside me as we walked toward EI. The conference room. Everything's in place. The moment Mr. Bishop signs those papers tomorrow, the transfer will trigger the contingency clause. Cedar Lake Properties will record the transaction, but ownership will immediately revert to Carolina Holdings through the trust agreement he signed 3 years ago. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 8 of the most successful real estate investors in the city, all of whom had kept my secret for years. They knew me as Caroline Bishop, CEO of Carolina Properties, the woman who had systematically built a real estate empire over the past 12 years. None of them knew I was also Caroline Bishop, wife of Robert Bishop, the attorney who claimed to be the financial brain in our marriage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Well, all except Elaine Phillips, our CFO, who'd been my roommate in college and had helped me architect this long game from the beginning. She'd been there when I'd met Robert, when he'd first dismissed my business ambitions as cute, and when I decided to show him just how far cute could go. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice. As you're aware, we've been planning to address the situation with the Cedar Lake property for some time." I pulled up the high bank statement on the screen behind me. The $450,000 transfer to Lakeside Properties LLC glowed like a neon sign of my husband's betrayal. Next to it, I displayed the property listing for the lakefront home, a modern masterpiece of glass and cedar perched above the water. Our original plan was to develop the entire Cedar Lake area gradually, I continued, clicking through several slides showing the master development plan. But it seems Mr. Bishop has made some interesting financial decisions with funds adjacent to company accounts that necessitate immediate action. Elaine raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of professional concern and personal indignation on my behalf. "The lakefront property and the jewelry purchases," she added, switching to the next slide showing the jewelry store charges. The security camera image from the store showed Robert leaning over a display case, the sales associate holding up what appeared to be a diamond tennis bracelet. William Blackwood, our head of legal, leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. "Ms. Bishop, are you suggesting we move forward with the complete separation of assets? That would mean going public with your identity as both Caroline Bishop, wife, and Caroline Bishop, CEO." "Yes?" I met each board member's eyes, in turn gauging their reactions. "It's time to end this charade. Robert Bishop has been spending my money on his mistress while dismissing my business acumen for 15 years. I'd say that violates several clauses in our prenuptial agreement." Because that was the beautiful irony of it all. Robert wasn't just betraying his wife. He was stealing from his own landlord. Every penny he spent on Veronica was actually coming from the company that owned the building where he worked, the house where he lived. And now, the lakefront property he thought he was buying. The boardroom erupted in controlled chaos as my team began executing our long-established contingency plan. In less than 48 hours, Robert would learn that Carolina Properties had always been more than the cute little rental business he believed. I ran. He would learn that his wife wasn't just the owner of a few inherited properties, she was his boss, his landlord, and the woman who was about to take everything away. The next morning, I maintained our usual routine. Robert had come home late, smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't his, and looking pleased with himself. I pretended to be asleep as he showered and changed, my mind racing through the final details of what was about to unfold. The pre-dawn hours ticked by as I listened to his familiar morning routine, the sound of his electric razor, the rustle of his clothing, the quiet humming as he selected a tie from the collection I'd bought him over the years. In the kitchen, I made his favorite breakfast, Eggs Benedict with hollandaise sauce made from scratch, just as I had every Friday for the past 15 years. The irony of preparing this last meal wasn't lost on me, like a condemned man's final feast, though Robert didn't know his execution was imminent. "You're in a good mood," he commented, adjusting his tie. Another gift from me, while scrolling through his phone. The blue light illuminated the shadows under his eyes, evidence of his late-night finalizing details with Veronica. "Did you fix that tenant issue?" I placed his coffee in front of him, French press, just how he liked it. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, mingling with the lingering scent of his cologne and what I now recognized as Veronica's signature perfume. "Everything's taken care of," I said, my tone light. "Actually, I'm hosting a special event tonight at the Grayson. I'd love for you to come." Robert barely glanced up from his phone, his attention caught by what I knew was an email from the bank confirming the funds transfer for the lakefront property. "Can't tonight, sweetheart. Critical closing meeting for the Henderson case, remember?" He pulled out his wallet and handed me his credit card with that familiar patronizing smile. "Why don't you invite some of your friends instead? Make it a girls' night." The platinum card felt heavy in my hand. Another thing he wouldn't have without my hidden success. I slipped it into my purse, knowing I would use it one last time. Today, to buy a celebration dinner for my executive team after everything was finalized. "The Henderson case must be coming together nicely," I said carefully, watching his reaction. Years of negotiating real estate deals had taught me to read the smallest micro-expressions, the tiny tells that revealed a person's true thoughts. "It's basically a done deal," he replied, standing and straightening his jacket with the self-assurance of a man who believed his own lies. "Once we finalize today, I'm thinking of surprising you with something special. Maybe a weekend getaway next month." The audacity almost made me laugh. He was planning a surprise with my money, presumably to assuage his guilt over buying his Mistress a lakefront home with our savings. My phone buzzed, a message from Elaine. "Bank confirms transfer complete. Paperwork ready for signatures at 2 p.m. All team members confirmed for tonight's event at the Grayson." "You know what?" I said, touching Robert's arm in a gesture that had become mechanical over the years. "I think I will invite some friends tonight. It's been too long since we've all gotten together." He kissed my cheek absently, his mind already elsewhere. "That's my girl, always the perfect hostess. What would I do without you managing our social life while I handle the real business?" If he hadn't been so self-absorbed, he might have noticed my smile didn't reach my eyes. After 15 years of marriage, 12 of them spent building my business empire in secret, Robert still saw exactly what he wanted to see. The supportive wife whose biggest concern was planning parties and looking pretty. As he left for his office, I opened my laptop to check the final preparations. The paperwork was ready, the legal documents were in order, and key business reporters had received exclusive invitations to tonight's special announcement at the Grayson Building. In less than 12 hours, the real estate world would learn that Carolina Properties, the mysterious corporation that had been quietly dominating the local market, was run by the woman Robert Bishop dismissed as just his wife. The security feed from his office showed him arriving, immediately calling Veronica into his private room. They thought they were being discreet with their morning meeting, but every lingering touch, every intimate whisper was captured by cameras that reported directly to me. I watched as he handed her a small blue box, the jewelry purchase from yesterday, and her practiced look of surprise. I closed the laptop, a sense of calm settling over me. There was still much to do before tonight. I had a company to run, paperwork to sign, and one final performance to prepare for. My last appearance as Robert's dutiful wife before revealing myself as the CEO he never knew he married. The Grayson Building's top floor had been transformed for the evening's event. Usually the headquarters of Carolina Properties, tonight it glittered with crystal chandeliers and the city's elite mingling over champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres. I'd spared no expense, using Robert's credit card for several of the more extravagant touches. After all, I was using his money to pay for the party that would reveal his downfall. There was poetry in that. Every detail had been meticulously planned, From the rare orchid centerpieces to the strategic placement of business reporters disguised as typical networking connections. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched Robert work the room, having arrived late with a surprised expression when his assistant had insisted there was an important industry event he needed to attend. "Caroline, this is quite the gathering," he whispered when he finally made his way to me, his eyes scanning the crowd of unfamiliar faces. "What exactly are we celebrating? And why are we in the Grayson building?" "A business milestone," I replied vaguely, gesturing to a passing server for champagne. 15 years is worth commemorating, don't you think? Before he could question me further, I spotted Veronica entering the room, looking confused and out of place. She wore a stunning black dress that I was certain cost more than her monthly salary, and on her wrist gleamed the diamond tennis bracelet from yesterday's shopping expedition. Robert paled visibly when he saw her, clearly not expecting his mistress to appear at his wife's event. "Robert?" Veronica approached hesitantly, her eyes darting between us. "Your assistant said there was an urgent matter requiring your presence here, but I didn't realize." She trailed off, finally taking in my presence and extending her hand awkwardly. "I'm Veronica Lewis, from the firm. I don't believe we've formally met." "Caroline Bishop," I replied, taking her hand with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Robert's wife of 15 years. How interesting that his assistant contacted you as well for this urgent matter." Robert stepped between us, his calm lawyer demeanor failing him for perhaps the first time in his career. "Caroline, I can explain." "No need," I interrupted smoothly, checking my watch. "In fact, your timing is perfect. The announcement is about to begin." As if on cue, Thomas appeared at my side. "Ms. Bishop, everything is ready." "Excellent," I replied, handing my champagne flute to a startled Robert. "If you'll both excuse me, I have a company to run." The confusion on Robert's face was priceless as I made my way to the small stage that had been set up at the far end of the room. The space fell quiet as I took my place at the podium, the Carolina Properties logo illuminated on the screen behind me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly hushed crowd. "Thank you for joining us for this special announcement. For those who don't know me, I'm Caroline Bishop, founder and CEO of Carolina Properties." The screens around the room flickered to life, displaying a professional photo of me alongside our company's impressive portfolio statistics. 342 properties, $1. $2 billion in assets, operations in 3 states. From my position at the podium, I could see Robert's face drain of color as he began to understand what was happening. 15 years ago, I founded this company with a vision to revolutionize the local real estate market. I continued, my voice steady and confident. Along the way, I married a man who believed his wife's greatest achievement was organizing dinner parties. A man who never questioned where the money came from for his expensive watches, his luxury car, or his designer suits. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as understanding dawned. Business reporters leaned forward, digital recorders extended, suddenly realizing they were witnessing something far more interesting than a standard corporate announcement. Today, Carolina Properties is proud to announce our newest acquisition, I continued, clicking to the next slide. The lakefront property appeared on screen, its stunning architecture drawing appreciative murmurs from the crowd. This beautiful Cedar Lake property represents our entry into the luxury residential market. I paused, looking directly at Robert, who stood frozen in place, Veronica confused beside him. "We'd like to thank our latest investor, who contributed $450,000 toward this purchase just yesterday." The screen changed to show the bank transfer record, with Robert's name clearly visible. "Although his investment method was rather unconventional," I added, as laughter rippled through the knowledgeable crowd, "transferring funds from a joint account containing company dividends intended for actual business purposes." "What is this?" Robert finally found his voice, pushing through the crowd toward the stage, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. "What are you talking about? Caroline?" "I'm talking about business, Robert," I replied calmly into the microphone. "The business you thought was a cute little hobby that somehow paid for our lifestyle while you spent our savings. Actually, my company's dividends on your mistress." Gasps and whispers spread through the room as all eyes turned to Veronica, who was backing away slowly, the diamond bracelet suddenly looking like a brand of shame on her wrist. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, "let me introduce you to Robert Bishop, my soon-to-be ex-husband, who just yesterday transferred $450,000 from our joint savings to purchase a lakefront property for his paralegal, Ms. Lewis." I gestured toward Veronica, who had turned deathly pale. What he didn't realize was that the property was already owned by one of my company's subsidiaries, and that every dollar in that joint account came from Carolina Properties' quarterly dividends. The screens changed to display financial records, years of systematic growth, and finally the recent bank transfers to the jewelry store and lakeside properties. Robert stood at the foot of the stage now, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, the dawning realization of just how completely he had underestimated his wife. "Caroline," he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You can't do this to me. Not here. Not like this." "Actually, Robert," I replied, no longer bothering to keep my voice down, "I can do whatever I want. I own this building. I own the firm you work for. I own the house we live in. And as of yesterday, when you signed those closing documents for the lakefront property, you transferred $450,000 directly into my company's accounts." The business reporters were frantically taking notes, their faces alight with the knowledge that they were witnessing the business story of the year. The real estate investors who had known my secret for years watched with carefully contained satisfaction as Robert's world crumbled before their eyes. "As for the Cedar Lake property," I continued, turning back to address the crowd, "Ms. Lewis, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. While Mr. Bishop did indeed transfer funds toward its purchase, the property remains under Carolina Properties' ownership. You're welcome to rent it, of course, at market rates. My leasing department can provide you with the appropriate paperwork." Veronica's face crumpled as she realized her dream home had evaporated along with her married lover's facade of success. She began edging toward the exit, but Elaine smoothly intercepted her. "Ms. Lewis," she said quietly, "we'll need you to stay for a moment. There are some questions about certain legal documents you processed for Mr. Bishop using company resources." The room had formed a loose circle around us, smartphones recording every moment of Robert Bishop's spectacular fall from grace. Business. Reporters were already tapping out breaking news alerts, their headlines probably writing themselves: "CEO's double life exposed," or "Wife reveals secret empire as husband's world crumbles." "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the room again, "I apologize for the dramatic nature of this announcement. However, in business as in life, transparency is essential. Carolina Properties has always operated on principles of integrity and innovation, principles that will now be publicly acknowledged under my true identity as both CEO and soon ex-wife of Robert Bishop." The applause that followed was genuine, led by those who had known my secret and supported my rise. Even those who were just learning the truth seemed impressed by the strategic brilliance required to build an empire while hiding in plain sight. The ballroom had transformed into an impromptu press conference, with reporters firing questions from every direction. Security had moved Robert and a tearful Veronica to a quiet corner where William Blackwood was explaining the severity of their situation. The diamond bracelet no longer sparkled quite so brightly on her wrist as she dabbed at her running mascara with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Ms. Bishop," a reporter from the Business Journal called out, pressing forward through the crowd, "how did you manage to keep this secret for so long?" I moved back to the podium, adjusting the microphone. "It was remarkably easy, actually. People see what they expect to see. When you're consistently underestimated, it becomes your greatest advantage. What about the lakefront property? Someone from the Real Estate Chronicle jumped in. Will you be pursuing legal action against Mr. Bishop? Our legal team is already preparing documentation regarding the misappropriation of company funds, Elaine answered smoothly, stepping up beside me. The recent transfer of $450,000 to Lakeside Properties, along with numerous other personal expenses charged to company accounts, will be thoroughly investigated. From my position at the podium, I could see Robert arguing frantically with William, probably realizing that the lakefront house he'd promised Veronica was about to be repossessed. Veronica herself had edged away from him, her social climbing instincts clearly kicking in as she assessed her rapidly deteriorating position. "Ms. Bishop," called out another reporter, "what happens to Bishop Legal now?" "Bishop Legal has always been a subsidiary of Carolina Properties," I explained, "operating independently, but ultimately answering to our board of directors. As of this evening, new management will be appointed, and the firm will continue serving its clients under different leadership." Robert suddenly broke away from William, storming toward the podium. Security moved to intercept him, but I held up my hand, letting him approach. This confrontation was inevitable, and I preferred it happen here in front of witnesses who could document every word. "You've ruined everything," he shouted, his face mottled with rage. "How could you humiliate me like this?" The room fell, silent, cameras rolling as my husband of 15 years finally faced the truth. I leaned into the microphone, making sure every word was captured clearly. "Humiliate you? Like you humiliated me at every dinner party, telling everyone I couldn't understand basic business concepts? Like you humiliated me by flaunting your affair at my own company's building? Or perhaps you mean like you humiliated yourself by stealing from a company you didn't realize your wife owned?" "Those were my accounts," he protested weakly, his voice cracking. "My money? Your money?" I pulled up another document on the screens. "Let's talk about money, Robert. Here's your employment contract with Bishop Legal, a subsidiary of Carolina Properties. Here's your salary structure, approved by our board. And here," I highlighted a clause, "is the ethics provision you violated by embezzling company funds for personal use." The color drained from his face as he read the numbers. Every dollar he'd spent on Veronica had been documented, categorized, and traced. The lakefront house, the jewelry, the expensive dinners, all paid for with funds that technically belonged to his wife's company. "Ms. Bishop," another reporter called out, "what happens next for Carolina Properties?" "As of this evening, Carolina Properties will continue its expansion plans under more transparent leadership. All contracts and projects will proceed as scheduled. As for Mr. Bishop," I turned to face my husband, who seemed to have aged a decade. "In the past hour, his position is under review by our board pending investigation of financial improprieties." Veronica chose this moment to make her move, stepping forward with rehearsed tears in her eyes. "Ms. Bishop, I had no idea about any of this. Robert told me the money was his, that everything was above board. I'm willing to cooperate fully with any investigation." "Save it, Ms. Lewis," Elaine cut in, her voice sharp. "We have copies of every document you helped process, every transfer you facilitated. Your cooperation isn't an offer. It's your only option if you want to avoid being named as a co-conspirator in the fraud charges." The evening had devolved into exactly the kind of society scandal Robert had always feared, but for entirely different reasons than he'd imagined. Instead of being humiliated by his wife's supposed incompetence, he was being exposed as a fraud by the very woman he'd underestimated. "Security," I nodded to the team standing by. "Please escort Mr. Bishop and Ms. Lewis to the conference room. Our legal team has some paperwork for them to review." As they were led away, I could see Robert's world crumbling in his eyes. Everything he thought he'd built, every success he'd claimed, every deal he'd bragged about. All of it had been orchestrated by the wife he'd dismissed as nothing more than a property manager. The reporters surged forward with fresh questions, but I held up my hand. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll find detailed press packets waiting for you in the foyer, full financial disclosures, documentation of Carolina Properties' growth under my leadership, and information about our exciting new developments. I believe in transparency now that I can finally be open about who I am. The next few hours passed in a blur of camera flashes and urgent conversations. Robert had been escorted to a conference room, still protesting that there must be some mistake. Veronica had slipped away quietly, leaving behind the diamond bracelet, a futile attempt to distance herself from the scandal that was already breaking across social media. I now sat in what had previously been my hidden office, though the nameplate already read Caroline Bishop CEO in polished brass. The view of the city at night was spectacular, lights twinkling across the skyline like stars. I doubted Robert had ever really appreciated the view from the building I owned, the same building where he'd conducted his affair, too busy playing at being important to notice the real power quietly accumulating around him. The initial market response is better than we anticipated, Elaine reported, sliding a tablet across my desk. Financial data scrolled across the screen, each number confirming what we'd known all along. The market valued competence over confidence. Carolina Properties stock is up 8% in after-hours trading. The transparency about your role as CEO is being well received by investors. Breaking news alerts are still coming in, Thomas added, his phone buzzing constantly. Business Network wants an exclusive morning interview, and Financial Times is running a special report on the hidden queen of real estate. Social media is exploding with the story. And the other matter? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The machinery we'd set in motion was running with precise efficiency, just as I'd planned. The freeze on Robert's accounts is complete, Elaine confirmed, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. The lakefront property transaction has been flagged for investigation, and the property will be returned to company holdings. As for Ms. Lewis, Elaine allowed herself a small smile. She's already contacted HR about whistleblower protections. She's offering to provide evidence of Robert's financial misconduct. Of course she is, I murmured, remembering how quickly she'd abandoned Robert once the truth was revealed. Make sure legal handles her carefully. She's not as innocent as she's pretending to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. We need to talk. Please. You've destroyed everything I built. I typed back swiftly. I didn't destroy anything, Robert. You just took credit for my work while spending my money. On your mistress. The response was immediate. It wasn't like that. I loved you. Everything I did was for us. Including the lakefront house for Veronica? I replied, then set the phone aside, watching it light up with his increasingly desperate messages. Thomas appeared at my door again, tablet in hand. Ms. Bishop, the Wall Street Journal is requesting an exclusive interview for tomorrow's edition, and the Cedar Lake development team wants to move up the timeline now that the acquisition is public. Schedule the interview for tomorrow morning, I decided, already mentally preparing my talking points. And tell the development team we'll meet for lunch to discuss accelerating the project. Oh, and Thomas? Have security pack up Robert's personal items. He can collect them from the lobby. As Thomas left, Elaine lingered, studying me with the same shrewd expression she'd worn when we first met in college. You know, I always wondered why you let him believe he was in charge for so long. You could have revealed yourself years ago, taken control publicly. I walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd quietly conquered while playing the role of a simple homemaker. The lights of other skyscrapers twinkled back, each one representing another boardroom where men like Robert made the mistake of underestimating women like me. At first, it was easier to let him underestimate me, I admitted. It gave me freedom to build something extraordinary without interference. Then, after I discovered his first affair 3 years ago, it became a challenge, seeing how much I could accomplish while he was busy looking down on me. And the lakefront property? You could have stopped that transaction. I could have, I agreed, watching my reflection in the glass. But sometimes you have to let people reveal who they truly are. Robert showed exactly what kind of man he is by stealing what he thought was our life savings to buy his mistress a house. He just forgot to check who actually owned the company he was stealing from. Another text from Robert flashed on my phone. "This isn't over. I'll fight this." I showed Elaine the message, and she laughed, the sound echoing in the vast office. He still doesn't get it, does he? The board meeting tomorrow will officially terminate his employment, I said, turning back to my desk. The evidence of financial misconduct is overwhelming. Prepare the paperwork for both the termination and the divorce. It's time to clean house completely. The city lights continued to sparkle outside, but inside, the real illumination was finally happening. The truth was coming to light, and with it, the revelation of who had really been running this empire all along. The next morning's board meeting was set for 9 a.m. sharp. I arrived early, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold, while reading the headlines splashed across every business publication. Hidden Empire, How Caroline Bishop Built a Real Estate Giant in Plain Sight, the ultimate. Corporate Takeover, Wife Reveals Secret Ownership of Husband's Firm. Queen of Properties, Caroline Bishop's Double Life Exposed. The Wall Street Journal interview had gone well, focusing on Carolina Properties' impressive growth and innovative management structure rather than the personal drama. Still, social media was ablaze with the story of the underestimated wife who'd built an empire while her husband spent her money on his mistress. "Ms. Bishop," Thomas interrupted my thoughts, appearing at my door with his usual quiet efficiency. "Mr. Bishop is in the lobby demanding to speak with you. He's not taking no for an answer. Security reports he appears to have been drinking." I checked the security feed on my tablet. Robert looked disheveled, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of a sleepless night. His favorite tie, the one I'd given him last Christmas, was crooked, and his eyes had the glassy look of someone running on whiskey and desperation. Let him up, I decided, closing the morning's financial reports. But have security standing by, and make sure the board members see him when they arrive. It's important they understand exactly why we're terminating his position. Robert burst into my office moments later, bringing with him the stale smell of alcohol and defeat. "How long?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "How long have you been plotting this?" Plotting? I raised an eyebrow, remaining seated behind my desk. "I founded Carolina Properties before I met you, Robert. I built this company while you were busy telling everyone your wife was too simple to understand business. The real question is, how long have you been stealing from me to fund your affair with Veronica?" I didn't steal anything. His fist came down hard on my desk, sending ripples through my coffee. "Those were our joint accounts. Filled with dividends from my company," I corrected him calmly. "Money you spent on a lakefront house for your mistress. Tell me, did you even consider where those funds came from? Or were you too busy picking out jewelry for Veronica to question your sudden wealth?" He slumped into one of the visitor chairs, his anger deflating slightly. "The firm, Bishop Legal. You orchestrated all of it? Every deal you thought you made, every contract you believed you negotiated, all approved by my board. You were never more than a middle manager, Robert. A subsidiary executive who got too big for his boots. Why?" His voice cracked. "Why? Maintain this charade for so long? Why not just tell me who you were?" "At first, because you were so convinced of your own superiority that you never questioned anything. Do you remember our 5th anniversary when you laughed at my suggestion about expanding into commercial properties? 2 weeks later, Carolina Properties acquired 4 office buildings, and you bragged to everyone about your brilliant friend who'd made the same investment." The board members were arriving now. I could see them gathering in the conference room across the hall. watching our exchange through the glass walls, their expressions ranging from professional detachment to barely concealed satisfaction at seeing Robert's comeuppance. "And then I discovered your first affair," I continued, standing to look down at him. "That's when it became something else. I wanted to see how far you'd go, how much you'd steal from the company you thought you controlled, all while dismissing your wife as nothing more than a property manager." Robert ran his hands through his disheveled hair, his wedding ring catching the morning light. "I never meant to hurt you, Caroline. The thing with Veronica, it was a mistake. We can fix this. Start over." "This isn't about hurt feelings, Robert," I cut him off. "This is about business. You've demonstrated gross financial misconduct, violated multiple clauses of your employment contract, and misappropriated company funds. The board is meeting in exactly 15 minutes to terminate your position and initiate legal proceedings." "You can't do this." He stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. "I'll fight you. I'll tell everyone how you deceived me, how you played me for a fool." "Tell them what, exactly?" I asked quietly. "That you were too arrogant to realize your wife was your boss? That you stole company money to buy gifts for your mistress? That every success you claimed was actually orchestrated by the woman you dismissed as just a property manager?" The board members filed into my office silently, arranging themselves around the conference table. Robert looked like a cornered animal as he realized this wasn't just a private confrontation. It was his termination hearing. His eyes darted between the familiar faces, searching for an ally, but finding none. "Mr. Bishop," William Blackwood opened his thick leather folder, legal documents neatly arranged within. "We're here to discuss several concerning financial transactions made under your authority as managing partner of Bishop Legal, a subsidiary of Carolina Properties." "This is ridiculous," Robert snapped, but his voice trembled. "I built that firm. It has my name." "Actually," Elaine interjected, pulling up financial records on the wall screen, "Bishop Legal was purchased by Carolina Properties 10 years ago. The name was maintained for market continuity, but ownership has been clear in all legal filings." She clicked through a series of slides showing the acquisition history, documents that Robert had signed himself, though I doubted he'd bothered to read them. I watched as William laid out the evidence, the unauthorized transfers, the misappropriated funds, the lakefront property purchase, and countless charges at high-end retailers, all technically paid for with company money. Each transaction appeared, on screen, a digital trail of Robert's betrayal and arrogance. $450,000 transferred to Lakeside Properties, William continued, highlighting the transaction. Another $32,000 at Brilliant Diamonds, numerous charges at luxury hotels and restaurants, all under the guise of business meetings. "Mr. Bishop, can you explain these expenditures?" Robert looked desperately around the room, finding no sympathy, in the faces of the board members who had kept my secret for years. "Those were legitimate business expenses. I was entertaining clients." "Is that what you call buying your paralegal a lakefront house?" Elaine's voice dripped with disdain. "Because Ms. Lewis has provided quite a different account of those business meetings." "Would you like to hear her statement?" "Veronica?" Robert paled visibly. "What do you mean?" I slid a document across the table. "She came to HR this morning with a full statement about your relationship and the gifts you purchased using company funds. She's quite eager to cooperate with our investigation." I paused, watching his reaction. Apparently, loyalty only runs as deep as the last diamond bracelet. That little... Robert caught himself, aware of the recording devices capturing every word. "She agreed to keep quiet. I gave her everything she wanted." "With my money," I reminded him. "Did you think she'd stay loyal once she realized you weren't the powerful attorney you pretended to be? That lakefront house you bought?" "Her? It's being repossessed as we speak, along with every other gift you purchased with misappropriated funds." Thomas appeared at the door with another update. "Ms. Bishop, Ms. Lewis's legal team has just delivered additional documentation. They're requesting immunity in exchange for her full cooperation. Of course they are, Elaine muttered, taking the new files. Rats and sinking ships. The board has seen enough, William announced, his expression grave. Mr. Bishop, your employment with Carolina Properties and all its subsidiaries is terminated effective immediately. Given the evidence of financial misconduct, we'll be pursuing full recovery of misappropriated funds. You can't do this. Robert stood again, his voice rising. I'll fight this in court. I'll tell everyone how you deceived me. Tell them what, exactly? I asked calmly. That you were too arrogant to realize your wife was your boss? That you stole company money to buy gifts for your mistress? That every success you claimed was actually orchestrated by the woman you dismissed? As just a property manager? The truth of his situation finally seemed to hit him. Robert staggered slightly, reaching for the edge of the table to steady himself. The house, he said quietly. Our home. I suppose that's yours too. Actually, it's one of Carolina Properties. Corporate residences. You'll need to vacate by the end of the week. I turned to Thomas. Make sure Mr. Bishop receives the paperwork about returning all company property, including the watch and the car. This isn't happening, Robert muttered, more to himself than anyone else. This can't be happening. I had clients depending on me, cases in progress. Those clients, Elaine interjected, have already been informed of the leadership transition. Most have expressed relief that they'll be dealing directly with our legal department now. Security will escort you out, I said, watching as Robert's world crumbled around him. Your personal items have been packed and are waiting in the lobby. I suggest you leave quietly. We wouldn't want to add creating a scene to the list of reasons for your termination. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Robert looked at them, then back at me, the fight finally draining from his posture. The proud man who'd spent years mocking his wife's business acumen now stood defeated in the office that had always, truly been mine. Caroline, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything we built together. We didn't build anything together, Robert, I interrupted. I built an empire while you took credit for my work. The only thing you built was a fantasy, funded with money you stole from me. The board members watched silently as Robert was led away, his expensive suit, another gift paid for with company funds, wrinkled and stained from his sleepless night. Through the glass walls, I could see office workers trying to appear busy, while stealing glances at their former boss's walk of shame. Well, Elaine said after he'd gone. That was certainly more dramatic than our usual board meetings, though I must say his reaction was rather anticlimactic given the circumstances. Have legal prepare a statement about the leadership transition, I instructed, already focusing on the future. And schedule a company-wide meeting. It's time our employees met their real CEO. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. News channels ran constant coverage of the story. Financial analysts debated the implications for the real estate market, and social media exploded with memes about the wife who owned her husband's company. Ms. Bishop, Thomas appeared with fresh reports. The PR team has compiled initial media reactions. The narrative is overwhelmingly positive. You're being hailed as a business genius who exposed corporate fraud while building an empire in plain sight. I scanned the reports, noting how quickly the story had evolved from scandal to inspiration. Corporate Queen, how Caroline Bishop built a real estate empire. While her husband wasn't looking, read one headline. The ultimate power move. CEO reveals secret identity as subsidiary executive's wife, declared another. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. I've moved my things out. You've taken everything from me. No, Robert, I typed back. You lost everything yourself. I just let you do it with your own money. Well, my money, actually. Elaine entered with more updates. Veronica's legal team has submitted a formal cooperation agreement. They're offering complete access to her personal records, emails, and text messages in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Accept it, I decided, but make sure the agreement includes a non-disclosure clause about her relationship with Robert. We're focusing on the financial misconduct, not the affair. Speaking of finances, she continued, the forensic accounting team has traced all the unauthorized transfers. Besides the lakefront house and jewelry, there were numerous cash withdrawals, luxury hotel stays, and even a down payment on a boat. I couldn't help but laugh at that last bit. A boat? Really? Apparently, he was planning to surprise Veronica with it after closing on the lakefront property. Elaine's tone was dry. He'd already picked out a name for it. The power couple. The irony is almost painful, I mused, turning to look out at the city skyline. How many client meetings did he sit through bragging about deals I had actually negotiated? How many times did he take credit for strategies I had developed? Thomas appeared again with more pressing matters. The Financial Times piece is ready for your approval, and Business Network wants to do a special report on women in corporate leadership. Also, the Cedar Lake development team has sent over the accelerated timeline for the lakefront community. I signed the development documents with the same pen I'd used to sign our marriage license 15 years ago, another piece of irony that didn't escape me. Ms. Bishop, Thomas hesitated. There's one more thing. Robert is doing interviews. I raised an eyebrow. With whom? Anyone who will listen. He's trying to paint himself as the victim of a long con, claiming you manipulated him and orchestrated his downfall. Let him talk, I decided. Every interview he gives just makes him look more foolish. How many men will admit they failed? To notice their wife was their boss for 10 years? The sun was setting over the city as I finished the day's tasks. In less than 24 hours, I had transformed from Robert's underestimated wife to one of the most talked about CEOs in the country. The business world was fascinated by how I'd built an empire in plain sight, all while being dismissed as nothing more than a trophy wife. One last thing, Elaine said, pausing at my door. The lakefront property has been listed for sale. The realtor thinks we can get well above what Robert paid for it. Good, I nodded. Use the proceeds to fund a scholarship program for women in business. Let's make sure the next generation doesn't have to hide their success to achieve it. A week later, as I signed the final divorce papers, I received another notification. The lakefront property Robert had bought for Veronica had been sold at a profit. The funds returned to Carolina Properties accounts. Veronica herself had accepted a junior position at one of our subsidiaries in a different city, far from any temptation to mix business with pleasure. Ms. Bishop. Thomas appeared with my morning coffee and a stack of magazines, the latest coverage of what the media was now calling the real estate revelation. Forbes wants you for their most powerful. Women Issue and Harvard Business Review is doing a case study on Carolina Properties management strategy. I flipped through the magazines, each cover telling a different version of the same story. The CEO who hid in plain sight. How one woman built a real estate empire in secret. The ultimate corporate undercover boss. The business world couldn't get enough of the story. The numbers from yesterday's trading are in, Elaine announced, striding into my office with her tablet. Our stock is up another 12% since the revelation. Investors are impressed with the long-term strategy and management structure. The fact that we kept this secret for so long while maintaining perfect regulatory compliance has actually enhanced our credibility. And Robert? I asked, though I already knew the answer from my security team's reports. Still giving interviews, though fewer outlets are interested now. He's shifted from claiming conspiracy to begging for reconciliation. His latest statement to the press was quite emotional. I pulled up the video on my screen. There was Robert, looking haggard despite his still expensive suit, speaking to a local news station. Caroline, if you're watching this, I understand now. I see what I didn't see before. Please just give me a chance to make things right. He still doesn't get it, I mused, closing the video. This was never about him. It was about building something extraordinary while being underestimated at every turn. My phone buzzed with a message from the Cedar Lake development team. First phase complete ahead of schedule. Board very impressed with your hands-on approach. Meeting next week. To discuss expansion? Schedule the meeting, I told Thomas, and set up the video conference with our investors. It's time to take Carolina Properties national. Looking out over the city, I could see my company's logo shining on several buildings that had once displayed the Bishop legal name. The transformation was more than cosmetic. It was a visible symbol of the truth finally coming to light. Ms. Bishop, Thomas interrupted my thoughts again. The Women's Leadership Conference called. They'd like you to give the keynote speech next month. The theme is Hidden Talents, Recognizing and Promoting Women in Business. I smiled at the irony. Accept the invitation. I think I have something to say on that topic. The day continued with a steady stream of meetings, each one reinforcing how different life was now that I could operate openly. No more pretending to be confused by business terms. No more hiding my knowledge behind a facade of domestic interests. The PR team has prepared a statement about the scholarship program, Elaine reported later that afternoon. They're calling in the Carolina Rising Scholarship for Women in Business. The initial funding from the lakefront house sale will support 5 full scholarships. Make it 10, I decided. Add matching funds from corporate accounts. Let's make sure other women don't have to hide their light under a bushel. A notification popped up on my screen. Another message from Robert, this time through his lawyer. Client proposes joint statement about amicable separation. Willing to admit financial misconduct in exchange for positive portrayal in company narrative. Decline, I told legal immediately. The truth is already out there. We don't need to manage his reputation. The sun was setting when Elaine brought in the final report of the day. Forensic accounting has finished their analysis. The total amount Robert misappropriated over the years comes to just over $1. $2 million, including the boat down payment. She paused, which, by the way, has been seized and will be auctioned next month. I signed the last document requiring my attention, an authorization for a new affordable housing initiative that would focus on developing quality homes for middle-income families. It was the kind of project Robert had always dismissed as unprofitable, never understanding that true success meant more than just quarterly earnings. One last thing, Thomas said from the doorway. Veronica's lawyer called. She's writing a book. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course she is. Make sure our legal team reviews any mentions of Carolina Properties or its subsidiaries. And Thomas? Send her a copy of her signed NDA, just as a friendly reminder. As night fell over the city, I stood at my office window, watching the lights. Come on in buildings across the skyline. Each one represented another opportunity, another chance to build something meaningful. The days of hiding my achievements were over. Now I could finally be exactly who I'd always been, a CEO who had proven that sometimes the greatest power lies in being underestimated. 3 months after the revelation that shook the real estate world, I sat in my office reviewing the latest quarterly reports. Carolina Properties hadn't just survived the exposure of its true CEO. We were thriving. Our stock had doubled, and the Hollywood-worthy story of the wife who built an empire while being underestimated had become legend in business circles. Ms. Bishop, Thomas appeared with my morning coffee. The Forbes cover story is out, and the photo shoot for Business Weekly is scheduled for this afternoon. Also, you might want to see this. He handed me his tablet showing a local news article. Former Bishop legal managing partner Robert Bishop takes position as associate attorney at Midwest Law Group. The article detailed my ex-husband's fall from grace, complete with quotes from industry insiders about his humbling career transition. The man who once mocked my business acumen was now starting over at the bottom, his reputation in tatters, his assets frozen pending the completion of our financial investigation. "Oh, and Ms. Lewis called again," Thomas added, his tone carefully neutral. "She's requesting another meeting to discuss her role in the company." "Tell Veronica that her position in our Minneapolis office is final," I replied firmly. "She's lucky to have a job at all after her part in Robert's financial misconduct. And make sure her supervisor understands that she's not to be promoted without direct approval from this office." My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine. "Turn on Business Network. They're doing a special report on Carolina Properties expansion." I switched on the wall-mounted screen, watching as financial analysts dissected our latest acquisition. A major East Coast property management company that Robert had tried and failed to partner with last year. The ticker showed our stock price climbing yet again. "In a stunning turnaround," the anchor was saying, "Carolina Properties, under the leadership of Caroline Bishop, has accomplished in 3 months what industry veterans couldn't do in 3 years." The question everyone's asking: what's next for the CEO who built an empire while being dismissed as just a property manager? The answer to that question lay in the documents spread across my desk: plans for a new development in Seattle, an innovative affordable housing project entering final approval, and a partnership with a leading sustainable construction firm, the same one Robert had dismissed as too experimental just months ago. "Ms. Bishop," my intercom buzzed, "the board members are here for the strategy meeting." I gathered my files, pausing to straighten the new artwork in my office, a simple frame containing the bank statement showing Robert's transfer to Lakeside Properties. I'd kept it as a reminder that sometimes the biggest mistakes come from underestimating the wrong person. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. These were the same people who had kept my secret for years, who had watched me build this company while playing the role of the simple corporate wife. Now they watched me take my place at the head of the table, no more pretense needed. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, opening my presentation, "let's talk about the future of Carolina Properties. And please," I added with a smile, "no need to dumb down the real estate terms. I think we all know I can handle them." The laughter that filled the room was genuine and respectful. As I looked around at these powerful executives who now openly acknowledged my leadership, I thought about how different this was from the dinner parties where Robert had dismissed my every comment about business. The meeting proceeded efficiently, each department head presenting their updates. Our development division had 3 promising new projects in progress. The expansion into the East Coast was ahead of schedule, and our affordable housing initiative had already received commitments from major investors. And finally, Elaine concluded, the sale of the Cedar Lake property closed yesterday. As per your instructions, the proceeds have been added to the Women's Scholarship Fund. Perfect timing, I noted. The first class of scholarship recipients starts their MBA programs next month. 10 young women who won't have to hide their ambitions or pretend to be less than they are. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find another message from Robert. "I miss you. The apartment feels empty without you. Can we talk?" I deleted it without responding. The time for talks had passed. The man who'd spent years undermining me while spending my money would have to live with the consequences of his actions. "Ms. Bishop," Thomas appeared with more updates. "The Harvard Business School case study is ready for your review, and the Leadership Conference wants to confirm your keynote speech for next month. Schedule a time for me to review the case study," I instructed, "and confirm the keynote. I think I have quite a bit to say about recognizing talent in unexpected places." As the day drew to a close, I stood at my office window watching the city lights come on. Somewhere out there, Robert was probably sitting in his small rented apartment, wondering how he'd missed the signs, how he'd failed to see that his wife was more than just a pretty face at dinner parties. But I didn't waste time thinking about him anymore. I had an empire to run, and this time, I could do it without hiding who I really was. 1 year after Robert's very public downfall, Carolina Properties had expanded into national markets, our success story becoming a case study in business schools worldwide. The press had finally tired of the wife who owned her husband's company angle, focusing instead on our groundbreaking development projects and innovative corporate structure. I kept only one reminder of Robert in my office: that framed bank statement showing his transfer to Lakeside Properties. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that success isn't always about who shouts the loudest or brags the most. Sometimes it's about quietly building something extraordinary while others underestimate. "You, Ms. Bishop," Thomas entered with the morning briefing. "Final numbers from Q4 show record profits. The East Coast expansion has exceeded all projections, and the new Seattle development is ahead of schedule." I reviewed the reports while watching Business Network's morning market coverage. Our stock had tripled since the revelation, making Carolina Properties one of the most valuable real estate companies in the country. The lakefront property that had triggered everything had been transformed into a corporate retreat center where we now ran leadership programs specifically designed to advance women in business. The first class of Carolina Rising Scholars was graduating next month, Elaine reminded me as she joined us with her tablet in hand. All 10 recipients had already received multiple job offers, and 3 of them would be joining us at Carolina Properties. The Wall Street Journal piece just dropped, Thomas announced, pulling up the article on my screen. They were calling me the Queen of Real Estate and highlighting our affordable housing initiatives rather than the scandal that had revealed my identity. I scanned the article, pleased to see the focus on our achievements rather than my personal drama. We'd launched 5 innovative development projects in the past year, including a groundbreaking mixed-income community that Robert had once dismissed as unrealistic charity work. Your keynote speech for next week's Global Business Forum is ready for review, Thomas continued. The theme is innovation through inclusion, particularly fitting given our history. I smiled, remembering all the times Robert had mocked the idea of women running major companies. Now, under my leadership, Carolina Properties had more female executives than any other Fortune 500 real estate firm. Ms. Bishop, Elaine interrupted, the board wanted me to remind you about the anniversary celebration next month. 1 year since we went public about your identity as CEO. Schedule it, I decided, but make it about looking forward, not back. We've built something remarkable here, and it's time to focus on where we're going, not where we've been. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about rising so far above someone that they spend the rest of their life looking up, remembering how they once looked down on you. I'd built an empire while being underestimated, and now that empire was changing the landscape of cities across the country. The cedar-scented morning air filled my lungs as I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the city wake up below me. 1 year and 3 months had passed since the night I'd revealed my true identity to Robert and the business world. In that time, Carolina Properties had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, including my own. We'd doubled our portfolio, entered 3 new major markets, and launched our most ambitious project to date, a sustainable urban community that integrated affordable housing, green spaces, and commercial properties in a design that had won international acclaim. I no longer thought about Robert every day. The sharp edges of betrayal had smoothed into something closer to pity. Pity for a man who'd been handed every advantage and squandered it through arrogance and entitlement. My phone rarely showed his name anymore. His desperate texts had slowed. To occasional messages on holidays or anniversaries, pathetic attempts to remind me of what we'd once shared. The Seattle property closes today, Elaine announced, joining me on the balcony with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She'd moved into the penthouse next door after her own divorce last year, and our morning coffee had become a cherished ritual. Construction begins next month if all goes according to schedule. Perfect timing with the new tax incentives, I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Have legal prepare the announcement for tomorrow. I want to emphasize the community integration aspects, 500 new affordable units in a neighborhood that desperately needs them. The Seattle development had been my pet project for months, a former industrial zone transformed into a mixed-use community with both luxury and affordable components. It represented everything Robert had claimed was impossible: profitability, alongside social responsibility. "There's something else," Elaine said, her tone shifting slightly. She handed me her tablet, open to a local news article from Minneapolis. Veronica Lewis has been promoted to department head at Williams & Associates. I scanned the article, noting the familiar face in the accompanying photo. Veronica had cut her hair short and adopted a more professional style since her days as Robert's paramour. After a year in our Minneapolis satellite office, she'd left for a competitor 6 months ago. "Good for her," I said, meaning it. She had potential, just terrible judgment in men. "Speaking of terrible judgment," Elaine continued, "Robert reached out to legal yesterday. He's requesting permission to apply for a position with one of our subsidiaries in Chicago. Apparently, his current firm is downsizing." I nearly choked on my coffee. "He wants to work for me? Officially this time?" "Technically, he wants to work for Lakeside Development Group. I doubt he realizes it's one of our newer acquisitions." Elaine's smile was mirthless. "William thinks it's a deliberate attempt to force contact with you. The firm's managing partner is an old law school friend of Robert's." I considered the implications, watching a pair of birds soar between skyscrapers. "Tell legal to issue a standard response. All applications are considered on merit. No exceptions or special considerations. And make sure HR at Lakeside knows that any application from Robert Bishop requires executive review before proceeding." "Already done," Elaine assured me. "Now we should head in. The Morgan investment team will be here in 30 minutes to discuss the Denver expansion." The day unfolded like most others now. A carefully orchestrated sequence of meetings, decisions, and strategic planning sessions. The difference was that I no longer had to hide my knowledge or downplay my authority. Every person who entered my office knew exactly who I was and what I'd built. By mid-afternoon, I'd approved the final designs for the Seattle project, negotiated terms for a new acquisition in Denver, and reviewed the quarterly financial projections that showed Carolina properties outperforming market expectations by nearly 20%. "Ms. Bishop," Thomas appeared at my door, tablet in hand. "Two things. First, the Women's Leadership Forum has officially sold out after your keynote was announced. Second, there's something you should see." He handed me the tablet, open to a social media post. It showed Robert at what appeared to be a charity gala, his arm around a blonde woman I didn't recognize. The caption read, "New beginnings with the remarkable Stephanie Wells at the Children's Hospital benefit." "Is this supposed to interest me?" I asked, handing back the tablet. "Ordinarily no," Thomas replied, "except that Ms. Wells is the daughter of Franklin Wells, majority owner of Summit Properties." Summit Properties, our most significant competitor in the Northeast market, and the company that had been aggressively bidding against us for the riverfront development project in Boston. "How long have they been seeing each other?" I asked, my mind already calculating the potential implications. 3 months, according to our sources, and there's more. Robert has been bringing her to business functions related to Summit's activities. He introduced himself to their chief development officer as having extensive experience with large-scale luxury projects. I felt a cold ripple of anger. Not jealousy, but the familiar frustration of watching Robert take credit for work he hadn't done. He's positioning himself as an expert based on Carolina's projects. That appears to be the case, Thomas confirmed. Ms. Wells joined Summit's board of directors last year after completing her MBA. She oversees their charitable foundation. I leaned back in my chair, thinking through the possibilities. Have legal review all our NDAs with Robert. I want to know exactly what he can and cannot discuss about Carolina's operations, and set up a meeting with our team handling the Boston project. We need to secure that bid. Already scheduled for tomorrow morning, Thomas replied efficiently. William thought you'd want to address this immediately. After Thomas left, I found myself staring at the framed bank statement on my wall, that $450,000 transfer that had started everything. For months, it had served as a reminder of victory, of justice served. Now it felt like a warning that Robert Bishop might not be as thoroughly defeated as I'd believed. I picked up my phone and called Elaine. I just saw the social media post, she said before I could speak. I'm already on it. Our investigative team is compiling a full report on Summit's recent activities and Robert's involvement. He's using our projects to position himself as an expert, I said. We need to know exactly what he's telling them. Consider it done. Dinner at my place tonight? We can strategize once I have more information. Perfect, I agreed. And Elaine? Pull the files on Summit's board members. I want to know everything about Stephanie Wells. That evening, Elaine's penthouse became our war room. Spread across her dining table were dossiers on Summit Properties' key executives, architectural renderings of the Boston Riverfront project, and financial analyses of both companies' recent performances. Summit has been struggling since their Atlanta project went over budget, Elaine explained, highlighting key figures on her tablet. They need the Boston contract to reassure their investors. Franklin Wells has personally guaranteed certain performance metrics to their largest shareholders, making his daughter's new boyfriend suddenly valuable if he claims to have insider knowledge of how Carolina operates, I concluded, studying a photo of Stephanie Wells. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 30, with an MBA from Wharton, and a resume that included brief stints at several prestigious firms before joining her father's company. Robert has attended 6 Summit-related functions in the past month, Elaine continued, swiping to a new screen. At each one, he's been introduced as a real estate legal expert with extensive experience in luxury development, without mentioning that his experience consisted of taking credit for his wife's work, I noted dryly. Our legal team confirms he's walking a dangerous line with the NDA, Elaine added. He hasn't explicitly mentioned Carolina properties in public, but he's strongly implying involvement in projects he only observed from the periphery. I studied the Boston project renderings again. The riverfront development would transform 30 acres of former industrial land into a combination of luxury condominiums, public parks, and commercial space. Carolina had spent 2 years preparing our bid, incorporating innovative environmental features and community benefits that set our proposal apart. What does Summit's bid look like? I asked, reaching for my wine glass. That's the concerning part, Elaine replied, pulling up another file. Their latest revision incorporates several elements suspiciously similar to our proprietary approaches, particularly the tiered financing structure that allows for mixed-income housing without sacrificing profitability. The exact structure, Robert once called financially naive when I proposed it, I said quietly. He's not just selling himself to Summit, he's selling our strategies. The good news is that he doesn't know our current numbers, Elaine reassured me. The specific financial models were updated after his departure. He's working from outdated information. I stood and walked to Elaine's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. The same view Robert and I had shared for years, though he'd never appreciated it the way I did. Each twinkling light represented a home, a business, a life, the tangible impact of real estate done right. We need to move up our timeline on Boston, I decided. If Robert is advising them based on what he thinks our bid will be, let's change the equation. Thomas mentioned the city council is concerned about affordable housing components. It's their primary concern, Elaine confirmed. The mayor is facing re-election next year and needs to address the housing crisis. Then we double the affordable units and adjust the luxury component to maintain profitability. Robert would never expect that move. He always insisted luxury and affordable couldn't coexist successfully in the same development. Elaine was already typing notes into her tablet. We'd need to reconfigure the eastern section, but it's doable. The profit margin would decrease slightly in the short term, but potentially increase long-term value through tax incentives. Make it happen, I said, and schedule a private meeting with Mayor Wilson before the final bid submission. I want to present this enhancement personally. There's one more thing, Elaine said, her expression serious. Stephanie Wells has been appointed to the Boston Redevelopment Authority's advisory board. Non-voting but influential. I felt a cold smile form on my lips. So Robert found another woman to underestimate. How predictable. What are you thinking? Elaine asked, recognizing my expression. I'm thinking it's time to remind Robert and show Ms. Wells exactly who built Carolina Properties. I picked up my phone. Thomas, I need you to add something to tomorrow's schedule. Set up a lunch with Stephanie Wells. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The Boston project team arrived early, and we spent 3 hours reconfiguring our proposal to incorporate the enhanced affordable housing component. By noon, we had a revised bid that not only addressed the city's housing concerns, but also maintained our projected profitability through innovative financing structures that Robert had never bothered to understand. Ms. Bishop, Thomas announced, appearing at my office door. Ms. Wells has agreed to lunch. She's available tomorrow at the Capitol Grill downtown. Perfect, I replied. Make the reservation under my name and send a car for her. I want this to be as cordial as possible. May I ask what you're planning? Thomas inquired, his professionalism not quite masking his curiosity. Just a friendly conversation between businesswomen, I assured him. Sometimes the best defense is an unexpected offense. After Thomas left, I called William Blackwood. William, I need everything we have on Robert's legal obligations under his separation agreement, particularly any clauses about non-disparagement and confidential business information. I'll have it on your desk within the hour, he promised. Is there a specific concern? Let's call it preventative maintenance, I replied. And William, pull the file on that lakefront property. I'm curious about its current status. The lakefront property, the catalyst for everything that had happened, had been sold months ago, the proceeds funding our scholarship program. But the surrounding land, including several adjacent parcels, remained under Carolina's ownership, part of a longer-term development strategy Robert had never bothered to learn about. By mid-afternoon, I had reviewed all the legal documents and formulated my approach for tomorrow's lunch. Robert's separation agreement contained explicit prohibitions against using Carolina's proprietary business information or strategies, prohibitions he was skirting dangerously close to violating. The Boston team is ready for you, Thomas announced, and Ms. Wells's office confirmed lunch for tomorrow. The revised Boston proposal was impressive, a masterclass in balancing social responsibility with financial viability. We had increased the affordable housing component by 40% while maintaining a healthy profit margin through tax incentives, phased development strategies, and innovative financing structures. This is excellent work, I told the team after reviewing the final numbers. Schedule the presentation to the City Council for next week. I'll meet with Mayor Wilson personally on Monday. After the team left, I returned to my window, watching the late afternoon sun glint off neighboring skyscrapers. In one of those buildings, Robert was likely boasting to Stephanie Wells about his illusory real estate expertise, positioning himself as a valuable advisor to Summit Properties. The same man who had dismissed my business acumen for 15 years was now attempting to profit from the knowledge he'd gained by proximity to my success. The thought should have angered me, but instead, I felt a strange calm. Robert hadn't changed. He was still the same opportunistic person he'd always been, taking credit for others' work and positioning himself as more knowledgeable than he actually was. The difference was that now I could confront him openly, without the constraints of maintaining my secret identity. That evening, as I prepared for my meeting with Stephanie Wells, I received an unexpected text from Robert. I hear you're having lunch with Stephanie tomorrow. Whatever you're planning, Caroline, please don't. This relationship is important to me. So he already knew about our lunch. Interesting that Stephanie had told him. Either she was more serious about him than I'd assumed, or she was transparent about her business dealings. Either way, it confirmed that my direct approach was the right strategy. I didn't respond to Robert's text. Instead, I spent the evening reviewing everything we knew about Stephanie Wells, her education, career trajectory, charitable interests, and role at Summit Properties. If Robert thought I was meeting her to sabotage his relationship, he was missing the point entirely. This wasn't about him personally. It was about protecting what I'd built. The Capitol Grille's private dining room offered both luxury and discretion, perfect for a conversation that might veer into sensitive territory. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a seat that allowed me to observe Stephanie's entrance. At precisely noon, she appeared in the doorway, escorted by the maître d'. She was tall and confident, dressed in a tailored navy suit that spoke of good taste and old money. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple chignon. Her only jewelry, a pair of pearl earrings and a delicate gold watch. She spotted me immediately and approached with an extended hand. "Ms. Bishop," she greeted me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for the invitation. I must admit I was surprised to hear from you." "Please call me Caroline," I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. I believe in direct communication when interests align, or potentially conflict. If my frankness surprised her, she didn't show it. "I appreciate directness," she said, unfolding her napkin. "Though I'm curious about which category you believe we fall into, aligned interests or conflicting ones." "That remains to be seen," I answered as the waiter approached with water and wine lists. "Perhaps we should order first and then discuss business?" She agreed, and we spent the next few minutes selecting our meals, a Caesar salad and filet mignon for her, seafood cob and seared scallops for me. Once the waiter had departed, she leaned forward slightly. "I assume this lunch has something to do with Robert," she said directly. "He texted me last night, quite concerned about what you might say." I couldn't help but smile. Robert always did underestimate women's ability to have independent conversations. "This lunch is about business, Ms. Wells. Specifically, the Boston Riverfront development project." If she was surprised by my directness, she masked it well. "I'm not directly involved in the bidding process," she said carefully. "My role at Summit is primarily focused on our charitable foundation. And your recent appointment to the Boston Redevelopment Authority's advisory board?" I asked, maintaining eye contact. "That's quite a coincidence, given Summit's interest in the Riverfront project." A slight flush appeared on her cheeks. "My appointment was based on my community development experience, not my family connections." "I'm sure it was," I replied smoothly. "Just as I'm sure your relationship with Robert Bishop is entirely personal, with no professional advantages for Summit Properties." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "If you're implying—" "I'm not implying anything," I interrupted gently. "I'm stating facts. You're dating a man who spent 15 years married to the CEO of your father's primary competitor, a man who has recently begun presenting himself as a real estate expert with insider knowledge of development strategies he never actually created." Our appetizers arrived, creating a momentary pause in the conversation. Stephanie took a sip of water, clearly gathering her thoughts. "Robert has been very clear about the boundaries of his knowledge," she finally said. "He's never claimed direct involvement in Carolina's strategic decisions. Yet he's attending Summit's business functions, offering insights into development, approaches he once dismissed as financially unfeasible when I proposed them." I took a bite of my salad, watching her process this information. Approaches that now appear in Summit's revised bid for the Boston project. Stephanie sat down, her fork, her expression hardening. "Are you accusing Robert of industrial espionage? Or are you accusing me of dating him to gain competitive intelligence?" "Neither," I replied calmly. I'm informing you of facts you may not be aware of. Robert's separation agreement contains strict confidentiality provisions regarding Carolina's business strategies, provisions he appears to be violating, perhaps without your knowledge. She was silent for a moment, studying me with new intensity. Why tell me this? Why not simply have your lawyers send a cease and desist letter? Because I believe in giving people information they need to make informed decisions, I said, professional and personal. Our main courses arrived, and we both took the opportunity to regroup. Stephanie cut into her steak with precise movements, her composure almost fully restored. You know, she said eventually, Robert described you very differently than the woman sitting across from me now. He said you were vindictive, manipulative, that you'd built your success on deception. I built my success while being underestimated by a man who claimed credit for my achievements. I corrected her. There's a significant difference. But I'm curious. Did Robert explain exactly how I deceived him? He said you hid your business activities from him throughout your marriage, she replied. That you deliberately misled him about your role at Carolina Properties. I nodded, taking a bite of my scallops before responding. Did he mention that he repeatedly dismissed my business ideas as cute and naive? That he laughed when I suggested expanding into commercial properties? That he took credit for my successful strategies at dinner parties while I pretended not to understand basic business concepts to protect his ego? Stephanie was silent, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Or perhaps he mentioned how he emptied our joint savings account, filled with my company's dividends, to buy a lakefront property for his mistress. I continued. The catalyst that finally ended our charade of a marriage? He said there were financial disagreements, she said quietly. That you had different views on how to manage your assets. A diplomatic way of describing embezzlement, I noted. But let's set aside the personal history. My concern today is protecting Carolina Properties' intellectual property and business strategies. Strategies Robert is now presenting as his own expertise to Summit. Stephanie set down her utensils, her meal barely touched. What exactly are you asking of me, Ms. Bishop? I'm not asking anything, I clarified. I'm offering information that may be relevant to both your personal relationship and your professional responsibilities. What you do with that information is entirely your choice. And if Robert continues his current activities? She asked. What then? Then Carolina's legal team will enforce the terms of his separation agreement, I said simply. Which would likely be uncomfortable for everyone involved, including Summit Properties. Understanding dawned in her eyes. This isn't just a courtesy meeting, it's a warning. I prefer to think of it as professional transparency, I replied. One businesswoman to another. Our dessert arrived, chocolate espresso cake for her, creme brulee for me. Stephanie stared at hers without touching it. Robert mentioned, you were developing a mixed-income housing model for Boston, she said finally. He said it was financially unsound but appealed to city officials. I smiled. Did he explain the tax incentive structure that makes it not only viable but potentially more profitable long-term than traditional luxury-only development? No, she admitted. He said the numbers couldn't possibly work. Because he never understood the numbers, I explained. Robert saw what he expected to see, a charity project from a woman he believed incapable of sophisticated financial strategy. Like father, like daughter, she murmured, so quietly I almost missed it. Pardon? Stephanie met my gaze directly. My father has similar views on women in business. He appointed me to run the foundation because it's good for the company, image to have his daughter involved in charity work. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Yet you have an MBA from Wharton and experience at 3 top firms before joining Summit. Experience my father dismisses as getting it out of my system before settling into a suitable role. She took a bite of her cake, considering something. Is that why you really invited me to lunch? Not just to warn me about Robert, but because you recognize the pattern? Her perception surprised me. Perhaps, I acknowledged. Let's just say I recognize the signs of a capable woman being underestimated by the men in her life. Including Robert, she stated. Especially Robert, I confirmed. A man doesn't change his fundamental view of women simply by changing partners. If he underestimated his wife of 15 years, what makes you think he truly sees your capabilities? Now? Stephanie was quiet for a long moment, absently stirring her coffee. The Boston project is important to Summit, she finally said. My father has staked a lot on winning that bid. Carolina's bid will be stronger, I told her frankly. Not because of anything Robert might have shared, but because we've been planning this development for years with a team that understands both profitability and social responsibility. Why tell me this? She asked. Surely that's giving away your competitive advantage? Because I'm confident in our proposal regardless of what Summit knows, I replied. And because sometimes women need to be direct with each other when men create complications. The check arrived, which I immediately took. As we prepared to leave, Stephanie paused, seeming to make a decision. Robert is meeting with my father. Tonight about the Boston project, she said. He's promised insights that will give Summit the edge. I nodded, appreciating her candor. And now you know the potential consequences of that meeting, both legally and personally. As we walked out together, she turned to me once more. This wasn't what I expected when I agreed to lunch. The most valuable conversations rarely are, I replied. Thank you for your time, Ms. Wells. Stephanie, she corrected, extending her hand. And thank you for the information, Caroline. I'll consider it carefully. I watched her slide into the waiting town car, certain that our conversation had altered the course of several relationships, professional and personal. Whether she would heed my warning about Robert remained to be seen, but I had planted seeds of doubt that would be difficult to ignore. Back at my office, Elaine was waiting with updates on the Boston project. The mayor confirmed for Monday, she reported, and the revised financial models are even stronger than we initially projected. Excellent, I replied, settling behind my desk. And what about Summit's activities? Interesting timing, she said, pulling up a document on her tablet. They've just requested an extension on the bid submission deadline, claimed they needed to reconsider certain aspects of their proposal. I smiled, remembering Stephanie's parting words. I think we may see some changes in Summit's approach going forward. Your lunch was productive, I take it? Elaine asked. Let's just say I found an unexpected ally in an unexpected place, I replied. Sometimes the best way to handle men who underestimate women is for those women to compare notes. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Robert. What did you say to Stephanie? She just canceled our dinner with her father. I set the phone aside without responding. Some messages didn't require an answer. The consequences would speak for themselves. That evening, as I reviewed the final numbers for the Boston project, my phone rang with an unknown number. Curious, I answered. Caroline Bishop speaking. Ms. Bishop, this is Franklin Wells. The gruff voice of Summit's founder was unmistakable. I believe we need to discuss the Boston Riverfront project. Mr. Wells, I replied coolly. This is unexpected. I was under the impression we were bidding as competitors. That remains to be seen, he said. My daughter suggested there might be value in a conversation before our companies commit to opposing positions. I leaned back in my chair, intrigued by this development. I'm always open to productive conversations, Mr. Wells. What did you have in mind? Dinner, tomorrow evening, my office. His tone made it clear he was accustomed to issuing commands rather than invitations. I'm afraid my schedule doesn't permit office dinners, I replied. However, I could meet you at La Maison at 7 Bao, if that works for you. A pause then. Fine. 7 Sao. He hung up without further pleasantries. I immediately called Elaine. Franklin Wells just invited me to dinner to discuss Boston. Wells himself? She sounded surprised. He never handles negotiations personally. What prompted this? Apparently, Stephanie suggested it, I explained. It seems our lunch had a greater impact than I anticipated. Or it's a trap, Elaine cautioned. Wells isn't known for ethical business practices. He might be fishing for information. Either way, it's worth exploring, I decided. Have legal prepare a basic joint venture framework just in case, and make sure our Boston numbers are solid. No room for misinterpretation. Will do, she promised. And Robert? Any reaction beyond that text? Nothing yet, I said. But I suspect we haven't heard the last from him. I was right. The next morning, Robert appeared in the lobby of my building, attempting to bypass security. Thomas alerted me immediately. Mr. Bishop is insisting on seeing you, he reported. Security has detained him in the visitor area. Tell them I'll be down, I replied, gathering my tablet and straightening my jacket. This confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it on my terms. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I spotted Robert immediately. He looked disheveled, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of haste and stress. When he saw me, he surged forward, only to be restrained by 2 security officers. Ms. Bishop has agreed to speak with you, one officer informed him. But you'll need to calm down first. It's all right, I told the officers. We can use the conference room off the lobby. Once we were alone in the small glass-walled room, Robert turned to me, his expression a mix of anger and bewilderment. What did you say to Stephanie? He demanded. She canceled dinner with her father, won't return my calls, and now Franklin Wells wants to meet with you directly about Boston. Stephanie and I had a professional conversation about business matters, I replied calmly, including your apparent violation of your confidentiality agreements. I haven't violated anything, he protested, though his eyes shifted away a tell I'd learned to recognize years ago when he was lying. You've been presenting yourself as knowledgeable about Carolina's development strategies, I countered. Strategies you once dismissed as financially naive when I proposed them. Strategies that now mysteriously appear in Summit's revised Boston bid. Those are general industry approaches, he argued weakly. Nothing proprietary. Our legal team disagrees, I said, as does the separation agreement you signed, which explicitly prohibits using Carolina's business information for personal or professional gain. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered. From our marriage. This isn't about the agreement. This is about you trying to ruin my relationship with Stephanie. Robert, I said with genuine pity, not everything is about you. My conversation with Stephanie was about protecting Carolina's interests and perhaps helping a fellow businesswoman recognize when she's being underestimated by the men in her life. What is that supposed to mean? He demanded. It means history repeats itself, I explained. You underestimated me for 15 years. Now you're doing the same to Stephanie, assuming she's just a decorative addition to her father's company, rather than a capable professional with her own ambitions. That's not, he began, then stopped, perhaps hearing how his defense would sound. Did you know she has an MBA from Wharton? I asked. Or that she worked at 3 major firms before joining Summit? Or did you just see the blonde Charity, director whose father owns a real estate company, a convenient stepping stone for your career resurrection? His silence was answer enough. You haven't changed, Robert, I continued. You're still looking for women to underestimate and men to impress. The difference is that now some of us are comparing notes. You had no right to interfere, he finally said, his voice hollow. I had every right to protect Carolina's proprietary strategies, I corrected him. What Stephanie does with the information I provided is her choice entirely. Though I must say, her decision to suggest a meeting between her father and me rather than proceeding with your expert consultation speaks volumes. Robert's face paled. You're meeting with Franklin Wells? Tonight? I confirmed. To discuss potential collaboration on the Boston project. Collaboration? He repeated, disbelief evident in his tone. Wells doesn't collaborate. He conquers. Perhaps he's evolving, I suggested. Or perhaps he recognizes that Carolina's approach to the Boston project offers advantages that Summit can't match alone. Robert stood abruptly. This isn't over, Caroline. Actually, Robert, it was over the moment you transferred $450,000 to buy a lakefront house for your mistress, I replied calmly. Everything since then has simply been you coming to terms with that reality. As he stormed out, I noticed several employees in the lobby trying to appear busy while stealing glances at the drama unfolding in the glass conference room. Robert's public outbursts were becoming a pattern, further eroding whatever professional reputation he had left. Back in my office, I found Elaine waiting with the preliminary joint venture framework for the Boston project. How did it go with Robert? She asked, noting my expression. About as expected, I replied. He's still convinced this is all about him personally rather than business interests. Classic Robert, she observed. Always the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own problems. Speaking of architects, I said, changing the subject, have we finalized the design modifications for the eastern section of the Boston project? The dinner with Franklin Wells proved to be a turning point for both Carolina Properties and my professional trajectory. La Maison's private dining room provided the perfect backdrop for what would become one of the most significant business negotiations of my career. Franklin Wells was exactly as I'd imagined. Tall, imposing, with silver hair, and the weathered confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. He arrived precisely at 70, accompanied by a younger man carrying a portfolio, who he introduced as my numbers guy, before dismissing him to wait in the restaurant's main dining area. Caroline Bishop, he said, extending his hand. I've followed your story with interest. Not every day a housewife reveals herself as a real estate mogul. I met his grip firmly. I was never a housewife, Mr. Wells. I was always a CEO. Some people just failed to notice. A brief smile flickered across his face. Including that husband of yours. Remarkable lack of observation on his part. We all see what we expect to see, I replied, taking my seat as the waiter approached with wine selections. After ordering, a bold Cabernet for him, a crisp Chardonnay for me, Wells leaned forward, his manner direct. Let's not waste time with pleasantries. My daughter seems to think there's potential for collaboration on the Boston project. I'm skeptical, but willing to listen. A reasonable approach, I acknowledged. Though I wonder why Summit's founder is personally handling a potential joint venture. This isn't typically a CEO-level discussion at this stage. He studied me for a moment. Stephanie insisted, said you were someone I should meet directly, not delegate to the usual channels. Wise advice, I replied, especially since Carolina's approach to the Boston project represents a significant departure from conventional development models. Wells scoffed slightly. You mean the affordable housing component? A necessary evil to appease local politicians, nothing more. Actually, I countered, pulling out my tablet, I'm referring to our integrated financing structure that makes that necessary evil one of the most profitable aspects of the entire development. I slid the tablet across to him, displaying our financial projections with the tax incentives, bond structures, and long-term appreciation models clearly highlighted. Wells studied the numbers with the intensity of someone who had built his fortune on attention to detail. These tax incentives aren't guaranteed, he finally said, though I noted he continued scrolling through the projections. The state incentives are already legislated, I replied. And the federal components have bipartisan support. Even with conservative estimates of only 70% realization, the model remains highly profitable. Our first courses arrived, beef carpaccio for him, tuna tartare for me, creating a natural pause in the conversation. Wells took a bite, considering something. My team presented similar projections last week, he said eventually, based on Robert Bishop's insights, presumably. Robert never understood these models, I replied calmly. When I proposed them during our marriage, he called them financially naive. If your team has similar projections, they developed them, independently or adapted them from public information about Carolina's previous projects. Wells set down his fork. Let's be direct. Robert has been advising Summit on strategies he claims were successful at Carolina. Your lunch with my daughter has apparently cast doubt on his credibility. Robert is attempting to take credit for work he never did, I confirmed, a pattern established throughout our marriage and apparently continuing with his new relationships. Including with Stephanie, Wells stated rather than asked. I maintained professional neutrality. Your daughter is quite capable of making her own assessments. I simply provided information about Robert's actual role at Carolina versus the expertise he claims to possess. Wells nodded slowly, taking a sip of his wine. Stephanie has always had good instincts about people, better than mine if I'm being honest. It's why I appointed her to the Boston Advisory Board. She sees things I miss. This admission surprised me. Perhaps there was more depth to their relationship than Robert had implied, or than Stephanie herself believed. The Boston project requires precisely that kind of insight, I noted. It's not just about buildings, it's about community integration and sustainable growth. Pretty words for marketing materials, Wells dismissed, though without his earlier derision. At the end of the day, development is about returns on investment. Short-term thinking, I countered. The most profitable developments in our portfolio are those that considered community impact from the beginning. They appreciate faster, face fewer regulatory hurdles, and generate positive press that enhances our brand value across all properties. Our main courses arrived. Filet mignon for him, sea bass for me. Wells cut into his steak with deliberate precision, a man accustomed to dissecting everything before him. Carolina and Summit have been competitors for years, he said after a few bites. Why consider collaboration now? Because the Boston project is large enough to benefit from our combined resources, I explained. Carolina has stronger community relationships and innovative financing structures. Summit has superior connections with commercial tenants and international investors. Together, we could create something neither could achieve alone. And the profit split? He asked, direct as ever. Based on investment proportion and specific expertise, I replied. I've brought a preliminary framework. I handed him a slim folder my team had prepared, containing the basic structure of a potential joint venture. Wells set it aside without opening it. I'll have my team review it. But first, I want to know what happened with Robert Bishop. The real story, not the public version. I considered my response carefully. This wasn't merely curiosity. It was Wells assessing how I handled difficult situations. Robert spent 15 years believing he was the financial genius in our relationship, I began. He dismissed my business ideas, took credit for my strategies, and eventually began using company funds to finance an affair. When he transferred nearly $500,000 to buy his mistress a lakefront property, using my company's dividends, I decided it was time to end the charade. And the public revelation? That was necessary? Wells asked, though his tone suggested more appreciation than criticism. It became necessary when Robert refused to acknowledge reality, I explained. Even when confronted privately with evidence of his financial misconduct, he maintained the delusion that our joint accounts were his money, and that he had built something I had merely observed. The public revelation was regrettable, but required to protect Carolina's interests. Wells nodded slowly. And now he's attempting to leverage his association with Carolina to position himself as an expert advisor to Summit. History repeating itself, I confirmed, taking credit for others' work while underestimating the women around him. Including my daughter, Wells added, his expression hardening slightly. That's not for me to say, I replied diplomatically, though I found Stephanie to be impressively perceptive during our conversation. Wells was quiet for a moment, signaling the waiter for another glass of wine. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. The Boston project is significant for Summit, he acknowledged. We've committed substantial resources to securing that bid. If your numbers on the affordable component are accurate, our current approach is insufficient. They're accurate, I assured him. We've been developing these models for years, refining them through multiple projects across different markets. Models Robert claimed to have helped create, Wells noted dryly. Models Robert actively ridiculed until they proved successful, I corrected, after which he began claiming involvement he never had. The waiter arrived with dessert menus, which Wells waved away, requesting coffee instead. I followed suit, sensing we were approaching the real purpose of this dinner. I'm considering two options, Wells said once we were alone again. Proceeding with Summit's independent bid, revised based on your revelations about Robert's actual expertise, or exploring a genuine collaboration with Carolina. Before I decide, I need to know one thing. Which is, I prompted when he paused. Why did you really have lunch with Stephanie? You could have sent a cease and desist letter about Robert's violation of his confidentiality agreements. Instead, you reached out personally to my daughter. Why? The question was perceptive, getting to the heart of motivations beyond business strategy. I decided honesty was the best approach. Because I recognized a familiar pattern, I admitted. A capable woman with significant education and experience, working in her father's company, being underestimated by both family and colleagues. I spent 15 years in Robert's shadow before reclaiming my narrative. Perhaps I wanted to spare Stephanie some of that journey. Wells studied me intently, searching for insincerity. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Stephanie said something similar. Said you two had more in common than was immediately obvious. Professional women often do, I replied. He drained his coffee cup, seemingly coming to a decision. I'd like your team to meet with mine tomorrow. Let's explore what a joint venture might actually look like. No commitments yet, but a serious evaluation. My team will be ready, I agreed. Shall we say 10 at our offices? My office, he countered automatically, then checked himself. Actually, neutral ground might be better. The Millennium Hotel has conference facilities. 10 years at the Millennium, I confirmed, recognizing the small victory in his willingness to meet on neutral territory rather than insisting on home field advantage. As we prepared to leave, Wells paused, seeming to wrestle with something. One more thing, Ms. Bishop. Robert approached me about a position with Summit last month, before he began seeing Stephanie. This was unexpected. I see. I declined, Wells continued. Something felt off about his claimed expertise versus his actual role at Bishop Legal. Seems my instincts were correct. They often are in business, I observed. It's personal relationships where objectivity becomes challenging. Like a husband failing to recognize his wife's business acumen for 15 years, Wells suggested with unexpected insight. Or a father perhaps underestimating his daughter's capabilities, I countered gently. A brief smile flickered across his face. Touché, Ms. Bishop. Perhaps we all have blind spots when it comes to those closest to us. With that philosophical observation, our dinner concluded. As we parted outside the restaurant, Wells extended his hand again. This was enlightening. I suspect tomorrow's meeting will be productive. I look forward to it, I replied, meaning it. The next morning brought a flurry of preparation. Elaine and the core Boston team arrived at my penthouse at 7 a.m. to review strategy for the summit meeting. By 9:30, we were settled in the Millennium's executive conference room, our materials arranged precisely for maximum impact. At exactly 10 DAOs, Franklin Wells arrived with his team, 6 executives, including Stephanie, whose presence surprised me slightly. She met my eyes briefly with a small nod of acknowledgement as they took their seats across the polished conference table. "Let's get started," Wells announced without preamble. "Carolina has proposed a joint venture for the Boston riverfront development. We're here to determine if that makes business sense for both companies." For the next 3 hours, our teams exchanged presentations, financial models, and development strategies. The discussion was intense but productive, with both sides finding unexpected areas of alignment and complementary strengths. Stephanie contributed several insightful points about community integration and sustainable design elements, clearly demonstrating expertise that went far beyond her official role at Summit's charitable foundation. "The financing structure is the critical path," Elaine explained, highlighting the tax incentive utilization that made our affordable housing component financially viable. By leveraging these specific municipal bonds combined with federal opportunity zone benefits, we transform what most developers see as a costly obligation into a profit center. Summit's CFO leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "These projections assume full utilization of the incentives. What's your contingency if the federal components are reduced?" "Page 17 shows 3 scenarios," I replied, including a worst-case model with only 60% realization of projected incentives. Even in that scenario, the affordable component remains profitable, though with reduced margins. The meeting extended well past its scheduled end time, with both teams increasingly engaged in exploring the potential structure of a true collaboration. By 2 p.m., we had outlined a preliminary framework that leveraged Carolina's innovative financing models and community relationships, alongside Summit's commercial tenant relationships and construction efficiencies. "This has been productive," Wells finally said, gathering his notes. "More so than I anticipated. I suggest our legal teams draft a formal joint venture agreement for review by both boards." "Agreed," I replied. "I'll have our team prepare the KIUBA initial draft based on today's discussion." As the room cleared, Stephanie lingered behind, approaching me after her father had departed with the rest of the summit team. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the joint venture opportunity?" I asked. "It makes business sense for both companies." "Not just that," she clarified. "For our lunch conversation, it prompted some important reflections, both professional and personal." "I'm glad it was helpful," I replied. "Your contributions today were impressive. You clearly understand more than just the charitable aspects of development." She smiled slightly. "I've been studying development economics for years. Today was the first time my father actually listened to my input on a major project." "Progress," I observed. "Incremental," she agreed, "but real. And Robert." "Yes?" I prompted when she hesitated. "Let's just say I'm reevaluating certain relationships based on new information," she said diplomatically, "professional and personal." "A wise approach," I acknowledged. "In business and in life, due diligence is never wasted effort." After Stephanie left, Elaine joined me as we gathered our materials. "That went better than expected," she noted. "Wells actually listened, rather than just waiting for his turn to speak." "Progress all around," I replied, sharing Stephanie's observation. "And the joint venture makes strategic sense. Carolina gets access to Summit's commercial tenant relationships, and they get our affordable housing expertise and community goodwill. Plus, it completely neutralizes Robert's attempts to position himself as an advisor to Summit," Elaine added with satisfaction. "Hard to claim special insight when the two companies are now openly sharing information." A welcome side benefit? I agreed as we headed back to Carolina's offices. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as our teams developed the formal joint venture agreement for the Boston Riverfront project. To everyone's surprise, Franklin Wells took a direct interest in the process, attending multiple planning sessions and actively engaging with the integrated development approach. 3 weeks after our initial meeting, the boards of both Carolina Properties and Summit approved the joint venture agreement. The announcement generated significant positive press, with business publications praising the innovative collaboration between former competitors. Boston Herald just published their feature on the Riverfront project, Thomas reported, bringing me the morning's media summary. They're calling it Revolutionary Development Model, and specifically highlighting the affordable housing component as a game changer. I scanned the article with satisfaction. The reporter had captured the essence of our integrated approach, explaining how the Carolina Summit joint venture would create a truly mixed-income community without the segregation that typically characterized such developments. Mayor Wilson's office called, Thomas continued. He'd like to host a formal announcement ceremony next week at City Hall, both you and Franklin Wells as joint presenters. Schedule it, I decided. And make sure our community advisory board members are invited. Their input was crucial to the integrated design. As Thomas left to make arrangements, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie Wells. Have you seen Robert's LinkedIn update? Curious, I logged into the professional networking site and found Robert's profile. His new headline read, Senior Legal Counsel at Midwest Development Group, specializing in integrated community projects and affordable housing initiatives. I couldn't help but laugh at his latest reinvention. After failing to secure a position with either Carolina or Summit, he'd apparently found a smaller firm willing to accept his claimed expertise at face value. More concerning was his listed experience, which now included strategic development consulting for major Northeast affordable housing initiatives, a thinly veiled reference to the Boston project he'd had minimal involvement with. I forwarded the profile to William Blackwood with a brief note. Potential confidentiality issue with Robert's new position. Please review and advise. William's response came within the hour. Reviewing now. Initial assessment suggests he's walking a dangerous line, but staying just within legal boundaries. Recommend monitoring rather than immediate action. I agreed with William's assessment. Robert was doing what he'd always done, exaggerating his involvement and expertise, but now with companies and projects distant enough from Carolina that direct confrontation wasn't warranted. Still, his pattern of behavior remained consistent, taking credit for others' work while positioning himself as more knowledgeable than he actually was. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Franklin Wells. Bishop? He greeted me without preamble. Have you seen the latest from your ex-husband? His LinkedIn reinvention? I replied. Yes, just this morning. Claiming affordable housing expertise after dismissing it throughout your marriage? Wells noted with obvious disdain. The man is nothing if not adaptable. He's always been skilled at rewriting history to feature himself as the expert, I agreed. Though I'm surprised you're tracking his career moves. Stephanie monitors these things, Wells explained, though his tone suggested more personal interest than he was, admitting, she thought you should know he's been approaching potential Boston project subcontractors, implying inside knowledge of our joint venture. This was concerning. That crosses the line from resume embellishment to potential interference. My thought exactly, Wells agreed. I've had our legal team prepare a formal cease and desist notice. I thought you might want Carolina's counsel to review it before we send it. I appreciate the courtesy, I replied. Please forward it to William Blackwood. We'll provide feedback today. There was a brief pause before Wells continued. There's another matter. The National Development Council is hosting their annual summit next month in Chicago. They've invited us, you and me specifically, to present the Boston Riverfront model as a keynote case study. That's excellent exposure for the project, I noted. My thoughts exactly, Wells replied. Stephanie suggested we should accept. Said it would position both companies as industry leaders in the integrated development approach. Stephanie has good instincts, I observed. She does, Wells acknowledged, his tone softening slightly. Better than I've given her credit for, historically speaking. Something you seem to have recognized before I did. The admission was unexpected. From a man of Wells' reputation. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see capabilities that proximity obscures, I suggested diplomatically. Like a husband failing to see his wife's business acumen, Wells noted, echoing our dinner conversation. Or a father underestimating his daughter's potential contribution. Precisely, I agreed. Well, Wells continued, his tone returning, to business. Shall I tell the council we accept their invitation? Absolutely, I replied. It's an important platform for showcasing the model. After ending the call, I sat reflecting on the unexpected evolution of my relationship with Franklin Wells and, by extension, with Summit Properties. What had begun as a competitive rivalry had transformed into a productive collaboration, influenced in part by the parallel experiences of women being underestimated in their professional lives. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Stephanie. Father approved my proposal to lead Summit's portion of the Boston Community Engagement Team. Direct involvement in the development process, not just the foundation side. Thank you for the push in the right direction. I smiled at this confirmation of positive change, replying simply, well-deserved recognition of your capabilities. Looking forward to working together on implementation. The Boston Riverfront Development Project officially broke ground 3 months later. The ceremony featured prominent city officials, community leaders, and executives from both Carolina and Summit Properties. Standing beside Franklin Wells as we ceremonially turned the first shovel of dirt, I caught sight of Stephanie in the front row, beaming with pride as her father publicly acknowledged her contribution to the project's community integration strategy. None of this would have been possible without the innovative approach championed by our joint community engagement team, led by Carolina's Margaret Chen and Summit's Stephanie Wells, Franklin announced to applause from the gathered crowd. Their work ensures this development will truly serve all Boston residents, not just those who can afford luxury price points. The recognition was subtle but significant. Franklin publicly acknowledging his daughter's professional contribution rather than merely her role as his family representative. Progress indeed. As the ceremony concluded and attendees mingled at the reception, I found myself approached by a local reporter. Ms. Bishop, the Boston Riverfront project represents a significant departure from traditional development models, she began. Some are calling it revolutionary in its approach to integrated housing. What inspired this vision? I considered my response carefully, aware of the broader implications beyond this specific project. The most sustainable developments are those that reflect the full spectrum of community needs, I explained. For too long, the industry has separated affordable and luxury components, creating artificial divisions. Our integrated approach recognizes that truly successful communities thrive on diversity, economic, social, and cultural. And the joint venture with Summit Properties? She prompted. That surprised many industry observers given your company's historical competition. The best innovations often emerge from combining diverse perspectives, I replied. Carolina and Summit bring complementary strengths to this project. Sometimes the most productive business relationships arise from recognizing mutual benefit rather than maintaining unnecessary rivalry. As the reporter thanked me and moved on, I noticed Franklin and Stephanie Wells deep in conversation with the mayor, their body language suggesting animated discussion of the project's next phases. The sight reinforced my growing conviction that the Boston collaboration represented more than just a successful business venture. It symbolized the potential for meaningful change in how we approached both development and professional relationships. Later that evening, as I prepared to return to my hotel room after a long day of ceremonies and meetings, I received an unexpected email notification. The sender was Robert Bishop, with the subject line, "Congratulations on Boston." Curious despite myself, I opened the message. "Caroline, I watched the groundbreaking ceremony online today. The Boston project is impressive. Revolutionary, as the press is calling it. I see now what you were trying to explain all those years about integrated development models and community engagement. I owe you an apology for many things, not least for failing to recognize your vision and business acumen throughout our marriage. Watching you stand alongside Franklin Wells today, it was impossible to deny the respect you've earned through your own abilities, not through any connection to me as I once arrogantly believed. My new position at Midwest Development is going well, though on a much smaller scale than your endeavors. I've learned valuable lessons from our past, primarily about the danger of underestimating those around us and taking credit for others' achievements. I won't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. Those bridges are thoroughly burned, and rightly so. I simply wanted to acknowledge, belatedly, what I should have recognized years ago. You built something extraordinary while I was too self-absorbed to notice. Congratulations on your continued success. Robert." I read the message twice, surprised by its apparent sincerity. After a moment's reflection, I composed a brief reply. "Robert, thank you for your email. The Boston project represents years of developing the integrated models I first proposed during our marriage. I'm pleased to see the concept receiving the recognition it deserves. I appreciate your acknowledgement. We all have professional blind spots. Recognizing them is the first step toward growth. I wish you well in your new position. Caroline." Short. Professional, acknowledging his apology without either dismissing it or suggesting it erase the past. As I sent the message, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me even through the divorce proceedings and subsequent revelations. Robert's recognition, however belated, of the reality of my professional accomplishments represented the final chapter in that particular story. My phone buzzed with a message from Elaine. "Dinner with the Boston team at Harvest at 8 Alfar? Franklin and Stephanie will be joining us." "On my way," I replied, gathering my things. As I left the hotel, I caught my reflection in the lobby mirror. Carolina. Bishop, CEO, recognized industry leader, woman who had built an empire while being underestimated at every turn. The journey had been longer and more complicated than it needed to be, constrained for years by others' limited perceptions and my own strategic concealment. Those constraints were gone now. My success was visible, acknowledged, and continuing to grow through new ventures like the Boston project. The woman who had once hidden her achievements to protect a husband's ego now stood in the spotlight, her capabilities recognized and respected by former rivals and industry leaders alike. The lakefront property that had triggered everything, that $450,000 transfer that exposed Robert's betrayal and ended our charade of a marriage, had ultimately proven to be the catalyst for my complete professional emancipation. In attempting to buy a house for his mistress, Robert had inadvertently freed me from the final constraints of pretending to be less than I was. Sometimes the greatest power comes not from concealing your strengths, but from revealing them at precisely the right moment. In business, as in life, timing is everything. 6 months after the Boston groundbreaking, the riverfront development had progressed ahead of schedule. The innovative financing structure had attracted additional investors, allowing for an expansion of the original plans to include more green space and community facilities. The mayor's office called again, Thomas reported during our morning briefing. They want to feature the Boston project in their upcoming International Urban Development Conference. You and Mr. Wells are requested as keynote speakers. Accept the invitation, I decided. And make sure Stephanie Wells is included in the presentation team. Her community integration work deserves recognition. As Thomas left to make arrangements, I turned to the financial reports spread across my desk. Carolina Properties stock had risen 30% since the joint venture announcement, with analysts specifically citing the innovative Boston approach as evidence of the company's industry leadership. My phone buzzed with a message from Franklin Wells. Quarterly numbers for Boston exceeding projections by 12%. Stephanie's community advisory board structure proving valuable. Dinner next week to discuss Phase 2 acceleration? I smiled at the ongoing evolution of our business relationship. What had begun as a strategic necessity had developed into a productive partnership, with mutual respect replacing the initial wariness. Dinner confirmed, I replied. Shall we include the development directors as well? Wells's response came quickly. Absolutely. Stephanie has some new community integration concepts to present. I set down the phone, reflecting on how much had changed in the past 18 months. The woman who had spent 15 years hiding her business acumen from her husband now collaborated openly with industry leaders. The CEO who had operated in the shadows now gave keynote addresses at international conferences. The empire I had, built in secret, now flourished in the light. And it had all begun with a single bank alert in the middle of the night. $450,000 transferred from our joint account to buy a lakefront property. Robert's betrayal had inadvertently provided the catalyst for my liberation from the constraints of others' limited perceptions. Sometimes the greatest mistakes are made by those who underestimate the wrong person. Robert had spent 15 years believing his wife was nothing more than a small-time property manager, never recognizing that she was actually his landlord, his boss, and ultimately his successor in the industry he thought he understood. The lakefront property that started everything had been transformed into a thriving community center, providing educational programs and resources for aspiring women in business. The house Robert had intended for his mistress now served as the headquarters for the Carolina Rising Scholarship Program, helping ensure that the next generation of women wouldn't need to hide their ambitions or abilities. Life has a way of coming full circle, transforming our greatest challenges into our most meaningful opportunities. My husband's mistress had moved into our house, but she never knew I was her landlord. And in the end, that revelation had changed everything, not just for me, but for an entire industry ready for a new approach to development, leadership, and recognition of talent, wherever it might be found. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.